You are watching Green TV, brought to you by Energy and Technology Update.
Comes from, in fact, the first project that we did, Azure Power in Punjab, utilized non-US panels, which made sense. There weren't US panels available, and we were happy to do that. I think, and this was my question to Mr. Garg, whose presentation I thought was excellent, is from the standpoint of impediment, the financing. I think we're going to see in future policymakers within national governments, maybe not the Chinese government, but the US government perhaps, in multilateral lenders looking at LCRs from a trade impediment standpoint. And I think it will cause some difficulties for those of us who are very actively trying to lend into this very exciting sector. So that's my perspective from the policy standpoint. The second thing is that, as you have said, the market is responding. OPIC just provided $30 million to an Indian-US joint venture that is going to manufacture panels here in India. So I understand that from a banking standpoint. I just always feel I need to raise that from the US perspective. But let me turn to the multilateral and bilateral perspective of investing by starting with what I think is a very successful civil nuclear project from the Bush administration. Really is the linchpin of what the Obama administration is doing with India in the clean energy space. Both the U.S. and Indian governments have committed to contribute up to $100 million, both on the development side and the implementation side. OPIC and the financing agencies come into this project from the implementation side, but there's a lot of really exciting developments going on in the research field between our national energy labs in the United States and Indian organizations, which are looking to really leverage technology to move the clean energy space forward. From the US perspective, all of these organizations come into play. Our US State Department and my colleague Eva from the US Consulate here in Mumbai is here, have played a very important role on the policy issues. USAID has contributed a significant amount of funding on the research side. Of course, the Department of Energy has brought in experts from the United States who have done now 2 seminars with Indian bankers to share with them in conjunction with the Asian Development Bank what our experience has been on looking at renewable energy and solar projects from the financing and risk standpoint. So we're engaged with the Indian banking community at that level, and I share some of the comments that were made earlier about the need to improve Indian credit officers at Indian lending institutions, their ability to analyze the risk and make some of the loans on a project finance basis rather than just looking at the balance sheet of big Indian corporates. Then, of course, the other 3 trade and investment agencies. The U.S. Trade and Development Agency has really done a lot of important work in the renewable energy sector. They have taken a number of leading experts from state governments and also the central government to the United States to meet other policymakers, both in the federal government in the United States and state governments, as well as introduce them to technology providers and companies in the U.S. that have successfully developed solar and other renewable energy projects in the United States that we would like to see replicated here in India. Exim Bank is our export credit agency. They look to where the stuff comes from. It has to come from America. So they're an ECA just like every other organization, every other country has. The important distinction with OPIC is we're not an export credit agency. We love to see U.S. technology, capital, equipment go into projects, but we would also love to see Indian technology, capital, and products go into the OPIC financed project. So we're very much a development finance institution, and we want to see India develop local resources that can be used to advance projects and the policy objectives of the Indian people and the Indian government. The title of my presentation was Multilateral Sources of Financing, so let me just hit very quickly on what financing is available. The International Finance Corporation of the United States can provide financing directly to standalone projects in India, including clean energy projects. They're looking at a very big one right now with an Indian corporate. The Asian Development Bank has been a partner with OPIC. They're very aggressive as well. Both the IFC and ADB have offices in Delhi. We work very closely on both policy issues and comparing notes on how we can advance clean energy in India. I think the real advantage for Indian companies is, unlike working with Exim Bank or OPIC, neither of these two multilateral lenders have national content nor national ownership requirements. So they can fund fully Indian-owned companies. So that's a real advantage they have. The U.S. is, I think, the largest shareholder in the IFC and the largest non-Asian shareholder in the Asian Development Bank. So we're an active player in both of those organizations. I should add that both of them are also looking with Indian banks to provide lines of credit that can be used to finance projects that the Indian banks identify with their customers. So that's a potential source of financing either directly or through your Indian bank for projects. I've talked about the Export-Import Bank. Most countries have an export credit agency. They're very good sources of financing, subsidized in most cases if you're procuring equipment, services from those countries. There are other bilateral development financial institutions. I think the key point I want to make on this is that many of us are looking at leveraging our ability to provide longer-term tenors and less expensive financing through the Indian financial institutions. So I think that is one of the ways, certainly for OPIC, a smaller institution, can really leverage that advantage that we have, longer tenors, cheaper financing, to help pass that on to the borrowers, the risk takers, the power project developers in India. I'll skip through this rather quickly, but just to make a point, OPIC is small. We're 150 people covering 150 countries, but we have a significant commitment to India and exposure. Since we began operating in India, we've provided over $2 billion in support to Indian projects. Just this year, we have more than doubled our portfolio to over $500 million, including our largest portfolio of renewable clean energy projects in any country that we operate in the world. I'll talk about it a little bit later today when we have the equity panel, but a large additional component of this is the financing that OPIC has made available to private equity funds, like the South Asia Clean Energy Fund, Allo Capital, Berkeley Energy, Olympus Capital Partners, that are making equity investments in Indian companies here in India to allow them to expand their operations. So that's another element of OPIC financing. OPIC financing. What are we looking for? As the U.S. Government Development Finance Institution, we need what I would call a U.S. nexus. In the past, that's been 25% equity participation by a U.S. citizen or a U.S. company in a project. We have just loosened that requirement in India to be able to count as U.S. equity that which is contributed to a project by a legal permanent resident in the United States. So it could be an Indian American or an Indian citizen resident in the U.S. who has a green card but not a U.S. passport. So I think that will open up OPIC's ability to provide financing to Indian citizens who are resident in the U.S. who are bringing capital, technology, know-how back to a project in India. As any banker would like to see, we need to work with companies that have a track record. Somebody within the project has to have done this before somewhere else successfully. I think in some of the earlier phases of the solar mission, there were a lot of bidders, including winners, who had never really done a solar project before. We have encouraged the government of India and have had positive feedback about pre-qualifying companies that are bidding so that most of these projects can actually come to fruition. We're interested in proven technology. We're not going to take risks. Most of the bankers in this room will understand that. So in addition to working with investors who have done this before, we want them to use technology that has been proven to be commercially viable and can be implemented fairly quickly. As a development agency, we're very interested in addressing the social and economic goals of India. Our first clean energy project in India was Husk Power in Bihar state. It was a small project, but we put a lot of manpower into that because of the additional benefits that that project brought to India. And then finally, we have, like most international multilateral lenders, OPIC policy requirements. They're very similar to what you would find at the World Bank or the International Finance Institutions, but key to that are worker labor rights, which come into play in land acquisition, of course, and then compliance with environmental standards. That is not a surprise, I think. I'll just touch very briefly on political risk insurance, non-commercial insurance. In India, we're really looking at this as a credit enhancement tool. So for example, if there are bonds that are developed to support a solar park in a particular state, for example, OPIC could use our political risk insurance coverage to help those bonds tied to a particular project to be rated by a rating agency and to become investment grade ratings, which will allow them to be sold in the market. We're already talking to a couple of project sponsors about that. So that's the key point that I want to make about non-commercial insurance. And then finally, investment projects that we've done. Ozar Power was our first project, solar project in India, very successful. What we liked about this project was how Ozar Power worked with the local community on the land acquisition issues. This is the project that I mentioned that is using non-US panels. But the reason that we were so interested in Ozar and we worked with Sun Edison is OPIC really wanted to play a catalytic role in the solar sector. So we're now moving a little bit out of the solar sector and looking more to waste to energy and energy efficiency and other sectors where we hope to be able to play the same catalytic role. Husk Power Systems I've mentioned. And just in conclusion, again, to reiterate that OPIC this year was a banner year for us. We've, I think, met the political, economic, and certainly energy obligations that President Obama and Prime Minister Singh discussed both in Washington and when President Obama was here in November. We're now looking at 5 new projects in India in 2012, fiscal year 2012. I think we'll double our portfolio in the clean energy sector again this year, which is very exciting for us. And then again, we see the PACE, the Partnership to Accelerate Clean Energy in India, as really a mechanism both for the private sector and for the government-to-government relationship to be able to identify challenges and address them jointly, and then look at other ways that we can work together both on the research side and the implementation side to help India meet the very aggressive clean energy objectives that the government has established. Thank you very much.